The last two episodes of the Avengers series concentrated on men who were given the chance to be more, a chance to learn the concepts of heroism in different ways, to rise up to the challenge in their own personal story arcs, facing it head-on with their wits, their sense of belief, and their intellect. This third installment concentrates on a god that is following the very down-to-earth humanistic formula. He was born with this power, expecting to be the King of Asgard from his birth, relishing in his privilege until we find him banished from the very person who was going to appoint him king, stripping him of his power. He was not good enough, and we find ourselves following his story, realizing what it means to be worthy, and how to shape one's destiny and following a path beyond what we are told when we are young. This is 2 takes, and this is 1 shot, an analysis of the Avenger, Thor, God of Thunder. Spoilers are throughout. We all know that the Marvel's interpretation of Thor, the God of Thunder, is slightly different to that of Norse mythology, placing him as Odin's son. However, what if I told you he was more than that? In Germanic mythology, Thor is a god also associated with sacred groves and trees, strength, hallowing, and fertility, and of course, the protection of mankind. The scholar Hilda Ellis Davidson summarizes, "The cult of Thor was linked with the men's habitation and possessions, and with well-being of the family and community. This included the fruitfulness of the fields, and Thor, although pictured primarily as a storm god in the myths, was also concerned with the fertility and preservation of the seasonal round. Thor's marriage of Sif of the golden hair, about which we hear little in the myths, seems to be a memory of the ancient symbol of divine marriage between sky god and earth goddess, when he comes down to earth in a thunderstorm, and the storm brings the rain which makes the fields fertile. In this way, Thor, as well as Odin, may seem to continue the cult of the sky god which was known in the Bronze Age. This presents a divine connection between the earth and the sky told within myths of gods and monsters, and from what we have learned about myths, there is always a slither of truth behind it. Looking at it another way, this can also link in a scientific format. Within the fields of science and technology, Swedish chemist Jöns Jakob Berzelius, 1779 to 1848, discovered a chemical element, and, you guessed it, he named it after Thor, calling the element thorium. But why am I telling you this? Well, you gotta wait and see. Thorium is a naturally occurring radioactive metal found at trace levels in soil, rocks, water, plants, and animals. This links the aspect of a presence of the sky god around the Earth, and like I said earlier, there's always some truth within a story. However, linking it to the MCU Thor, we can delve more into this element. The type of radiation emitted is mostly alpha particles, toxic on the inside of the body if the skin is broken, and weak gamma rays, pure energy, hazardous for the whole body inside and out. Thorium is used to make things such as brick, heat-resistant paint, metals used in aerospace industry, in nuclear reactions, as well as other things, making it useful because of its extremely high boiling and melting points. Now look at this. Weak gamma rays could link to the concept that Thor was always meant to match with Hulk in power, and hence why throughout the MCU films is always Thor, except that one time when Tony tells Hulk to repeatedly go to sleep, that has to knock Hulk out or endure a battle with a giant monster. On the trash planet, the battle collides like a chemical reaction, almost like a nuclear reaction, which thorium is used for. The element's extreme melting point can explain as to why Thor in the MCU could have survived the heat of the Forge from a sun in Niederweglich, where he was tasked in helping making the Stormbreaker. The metals used for aerospace exploration could explore why Thor survived in space for such a long time, until the Guardians of the Galaxy found him within the wreckage. Now, I understand that I'm comparing Thor, a god, to an element, but like I said before, there's always some truth within stories and connections. And don't worry, I wasn't comparing them. Odin is Thor's father, and from what we have learnt throughout the Thor storyline, his influence has a huge factor on Thor, especially at the beginning when we realise how brash Thor is, until he becomes banished. But did you not think there was more to this decision than what we were presented? Let's take a look. We all know the story. In the first film, Thor was exiled to Earth, stripped of his honour and his power. Odin declaring his son unworthy of his title, unworthy of the loved ones he had betrayed. Odin bound Thor's power to Mjolnir and cast it with Thor to Earth. Thor had to prove himself worthy in order to gain his power back. And he does, once he learns about sacrifice and how to protect someone and something from the forces of evil without selfish intent, to basically use his powers for good. The second film, we are introduced to another darker force and the Ether, which turns out to be the Reality Stone. What I want to concentrate on, though, is what Odin said about his story about his father vanquishing them, and how this is linked to some of the reasons as to why Odin cast his son out in the first film, and how we realise his story is a lie in Thor Ragnarok. ScreenRant.com explains. According to Thor Dark World, Odin's father Bor battled against the Dark Elves and won a hard-fought war to render them almost extinct. He then ushered in thousands of years of peace. Thor Ragnarok revealed that this peace was actually ended by Odin himself, whose imperial ambitions led Asgardian forces to plunder the rest of the 9 realms. Hela was his executioner, leading his forces to battle and slaughtering all who dared to oppose Asgard. Finally though, Hela's ambition for conquest and her lust for blood outstripped Odin's. The Allfather was forced to banish Hela, albeit at a terrible cost, and he committed himself to the cause of peace. This subtly rewrites Odin's motives in Thor. He saw too much of himself in his son, a brash and reckless man whose imperialistic ways would plunge the 9 realms into chaos and launch Asgard into the age of conquest. No wonder Odin was so angry. When he judged Thor as unworthy, he was also casting judgment upon the man he used to be. In order to earn his hammer and become worthy, Thor would have to learn that his responsibility was to act as a champion and protector of the 9 realms, not its conqueror. It was a lesson that Odin himself had to learn in the past, but at a terrible cost. It seems both father and son are attempting to understand each other and their own mistakes as time moves on. It presents Thor, and amazingly the Allfather, as very much human. I mean, even gods make mistakes. But it's those telling moments throughout where Odin is denying his son, Thor, any kind of advancement that actually presents the growth of Thor by finding other ways or other means of protecting Asgard. Odin's way of thinking is somewhat becoming obsolete, whereas Thor, drifting away from his father underneath his shadow, stands tall and uses his voice to show another way. If we were linking thoughts of religion and myths, screenwriter and Thor fan Mark Protasiewicz wrote a script for the first Thor film, describing it as an Old Testament god who becomes a New Testament god, following the concept of Thor's journey being that attacking anything that opposes him is not the right way to go about things. To be a true king, a true Asgardian, the wisest choice of action is perhaps looking at the problem in all angles and predicting the future of a good strategy. And he eventually does, whereas Odin, stuck in his way of thinking, doesn't move on. These ways of thinking, especially at the beginning, have both father and son act like a power duo until Thor forged his own path, to which afterward there was always a butting of heads, almost a power trip of egos. It could be said that Odin is like a lost cause in his ego until his very last conversation with both his sons as he reflects his life. And it could also be said that Thor, getting out of his father's shadow, leaves his ego and strives to be a helpful Avenger, discussing strategy with his teammates, battling the villains with his friends, and then, losing everything, is hell-bent on revenge with a scary concentration on his primary target, Thanos. That is, until he loses all confidence and his ego has shrunk so considerably that he hides away on Earth, getting drunk and attempting to forget his rage and failure. All because of that one fatal mistake of not hitting Thanos in the head, like he did with Malekith. Revenge has been said to fog the mind, and Thor was not thinking straight. But who could blame him? Placing all the things that has happened to Thor, I'm sure he has gained a lot, as I have quickly covered, but we haven't discussed what he has lost. I reckon it's in Thor Ragnarok that things start to go very sour. We understand that in Thor the Dark World, Thor and Loki both lose their mother as she tries to protect Jane Foster, but looking further, in the third installment, and afterward too, Thor loses his father, his hammer Mjolnir, his home Asgard, his eye, and his girlfriend Jane Foster. Later on, he loses his brother Loki, as well as his best friend Heimdall, to Thanos, and because of his fatal mistake, Thor eventually loses his self-worth. Now if you count them, there is 9 things of loss. Looking back to what I said about Odin in my Midsommar episode, Odin had to suffer for 9 days and 9 nights to gain the knowledge and bring it to the world. Through self-suffering, it might be that Thor has become the new Odin and a worthy King of Asgard. But this sounds like he's actually following his father's footsteps, which we see and really want at the very beginning, but throughout we see this fire of wanting to be king die down to almost nothing. At the beginning, Thor wasn't worthy to rule, based on past mistakes, and then when he showed his worth to his father, Thor was considered king in training as he had to bring peace to the 9 realms. In the second film, Thor turns it down again, thinking he still needs to show his worth, and thus leaves Loki in disguise as the king. In the third film, right at the end, realizes his power is within himself, accepts the title as the king of the last of the Asgardians on the spaceship, but then was overthrown and most of his people were eliminated by Thanos. In Endgame, it is here that we see Thor at his lowest, hiding in New Asgard in Norway, technically in charge, but not really. Coming down to the docks for supplies and hiding away from his subjects is only after he is able to find his worth again, after seeing his mother in the past have a conversation that lifts his spirits, that Thor is able to prove it to himself that he can beat Thanos, with a clear conscience and a clear heart. And with help from his friends, the past is rewritten and everything is almost back to normal. And when the dust settles, Thor reflects on his journey, appointing Valkyrie as the protector of Asgard. This is the moment when he is standing on his own feet, defining his own destiny with everything that's happened to him. From everything he has gained and everything he has lost, Thor goes forward with the wisdom of perhaps being the new Odin, but not shackled to the shadow of egotistical power and wanting to reign over the 9 realms. Thor spreads his wings and finds that he's finally free to forge his own path, which is exciting in itself, don't you agree?
If you enjoyed what was said, please follow me on Anchor, Spotify, and other podcasting platforms to never miss an episode. Be kept in the loop for new content on my Instagram and Twitter page. For more of a visual appeal, I've introduced a YouTube channel. And if you enjoy to read what was said instead, follow my blog, linked elsewhere. I'm a podcaster that enjoys this process, and it wouldn't have been made a reality without you, the listener. And so, I thank you for listening, and I hope you stick around for more.